The year was 2347, and humanity had spread across the stars. They had built colonies on distant worlds, created great cities on moons and planets, and formed a single government called the Terran Coalition. For the first time in their history, humans were united. They looked at the galaxy with hope and wonder, believing that their future was bright. Captain Daniel Harris stood on the bridge of his starship, the Defiance. He was a tall man with gray at his temples and calm eyes that had seen many battles. His ship patrolled the outer territories near the Kepler Expanse, a region of space filled with young stars and unexplored worlds. It was quiet duty, far from Earth, but Harris liked the peace. He had spent 20 years in the fleet, and he had learned to appreciate quiet moments. His crew worked around him. Lieutenant Commander Katie Bennett sat at the tactical station, her fingers moving across holographic displays. She was young but brilliant, known throughout the fleet for her sharp mind and quick thinking. Chief Engineer Ben Crawford monitored the ship's systems from a station, while Weapons Officer Ryan Ortiz ran routine checks on their defensive arrays. It was an ordinary day. Then everything changed. The communication officer turned pale. "Captain, we're receiving an emergency broadcast from Earth. Priority 1. Harris felt cold spread through his chest. Priority 1 meant disaster. Put on screen. The main display flickered, and they saw Earth from orbit. But Earth was not alone. Surrounding the blue planet was a fleet of alien ships so vast that it blocked out the stars. There were thousands of them, each one massive and dark, covered in strange symbols that glowed with purple light. They hung in space like a wall of death, silent and terrible. "My God," Bennett whispered. The broadcast switched to Geneva, to the Great Hall of the United Nations. World leaders sat frozen in their seats, staring at a figure that stood before them. The alien was tall and thin, with gray skin and for arms. Its eyes were black pools that reflected no light. When it spoke, its voice was cold and smooth, translated by machines into every human language. "I am High Arbiter Zyrith of the Valthorian Dominion. We have watched your species spread across this region of space. You have built ships and weapons. You have claimed worlds that do not belong to you. This expansion ends now." Zyrith paused, letting his words sink in. "The Dominion has existed for 50,000 years. We have brought order to over 400 species across this galaxy. All of them serve us now. All of them have accepted their place in our empire. You will do the same." He raised one of his 4 hands. "You have 30 standard days to surrender unconditionally. Your governments will dissolve. Your military forces will disarm. Your people will serve the Dominion as workers and soldiers, as all conquered species do. If you refuse, we will destroy your worlds, burn your colonies, and erase your kind from existence. There will be no negotiation. There will be no mercy." Zyrith looked directly into the camera, as if he could see every human watching. "We have never failed to conquer a species that resisted us. Your weapons are primitive. Your ships are fragile. Your people are young and foolish. Surrender is your only path to survival." The broadcast ended. On the bridge of the Defiance, no one moved. Harris stared at the screen where the alien fleet still hung around Earth like a noose. He had faced pirates and rebels and rogue states. He had never faced anything like this. "How many ships?" he asked quietly. Bennett's voice shook slightly as she answered. "Based on the imagery, approximately 12,000 capital ships. Unknown number of support vessels and fighters. Their technology appears to be significantly more advanced than ours. 12,000 ships. The entire Terran Coalition fleet numbered less than 2,000 combat vessels. The numbers were impossible. On Earth, panic spread through the streets. People ran and screamed and wept. Stock markets crashed in minutes. Religious leaders called for prayer. Governments declared states of emergency. Some people suggested surrender. Better to live as slaves and die as corpses, they said. But others refused to accept that choice. Admiral Maria Torres watched the broadcast from Fleet Command on Luna. She was a small woman with iron-gray hair and eyes that could cut through steel. She had grown up in the favelas of Rio de Janeiro, fought her way into the military academy, and risen through the ranks through sheer determination. She had never backed down from a fight in her life. She picked up her communicator. "This is Admiral Torres to all fleet commands. Begin immediate recall of all vessels. Every ship capable of fighting is to return to the Sol system. We are going to war." Secretary General Peter Lawson addressed the world that night. He was an older man, a former teacher who had entered politics to make a difference. His hands trembled slightly as he spoke, but his voice was steady. "I have heard the alien demand. They want us to surrender our freedom, our dignity, our future. They want us to become slaves to an empire that has crushed hundreds of other species." He paused. "I say no." The words hung in the air. "I will not hand our children to conquerors. I will not tell our people that their lives mean nothing. I will not betray everything humanity has built over thousands of years. We did not come this far, did not survive wars and plagues and disasters, to bow before tyrants from the stars." He looked into the camera with fierce determination. "To the Valthorian Dominion, I say this. We will not surrender. Not in 30 days. Not ever. If you want our world, you will have to take it from us. And we will make you pay for every inch." Across human space, people watched the speech. Many were afraid. Many were uncertain. But something stirred in their hearts, something ancient and stubborn. It was the same fire that had driven humans to explore oceans and climb mountains and reach for the stars. It was a refusal to give up even when all hope seemed lost. On the Defiance, Captain Harris turned to his crew. "You heard the Secretary General. We have work to do." He sat in his command chair. "Set course for Earth. Maximum speed." Lieutenant Commander Bennett began working at her station, already thinking about the enemy's ships, searching for patterns and weaknesses. There had to be something. No force was truly invincible. She would find their weakness if it took her last breath. The clock had started. 30 days until the deadline. 30 days to prepare for the greatest battle humanity had ever faced. The stars that had once seemed so welcoming now felt cold and hostile. But humanity would not go quietly into the night. The days passed quickly, each one bringing humanity closer to the deadline. Across the solar system, ships gathered. Old vessels were pulled from retirement. Civilian freighters were fitted with weapons. Factories worked day and night to build more fighters, more missiles, more armor. Every human who could hold a weapon trained for combat. It was not enough. Everyone knew it was not enough. But they prepared anyway. On Mars, in a research facility beneath the red dust, Dr. Nathan Cole studied everything humanity knew about the Valthorian Dominion. He was a xenoanthropologist, a man who had spent his life studying alien cultures. He was thin and quiet, with thick glasses and a habit of talking to himself. Most people thought he was strange, but he was also one of the smartest people alive. Cole had spent 3 days without sleep, reading intercepted Valthorian communications, and scanning ancient records from dead civilizations. What he found made his blood run cold. The Dominion did not simply conquer species. They broke them completely. When the Valthorians took a world, they destroyed every trace of its culture. They burned books and art. They banned native languages. They killed anyone who tried to preserve old traditions. Within a few generations, the conquered species forgot who they had once been. They became perfect slaves, unable to imagine any life except service to the Dominion. Cole looked at images of subjugated worlds. He saw beings of all shapes and sizes working in mines and factories, their eyes empty and dead. They had no hope. They had no dreams. They were tools, nothing more. "They don't just want our surrender," Cole muttered to himself. "They want to erase us. Everything we are, everything we've ever been." He sent his findings to Fleet Command. Admiral Torres read the report with a grim face. Some advisors suggested that perhaps limited surrender could buy time. Perhaps humanity could pretend to submit while secretly preparing to fight back later. Torres shook her head. "Once we bow, we never rise again. That's what this report tells us." The Dominion has done this 400 times. They know how to crush rebellions before they start. She looked at the other officers. We fight now or we die as slaves. Far from Earth, the Defiants cross into Dominion space. Captain Harris had been given a dangerous mission: gather intelligence on enemy positions and find any weakness that could help in the coming battle. It was almost certainly a one-way trip, but Harris had volunteered without hesitation. The ship moved through the darkness between stars, running silent to avoid detection. The crew spoke in whispers, as the enemy might hear them across the void. Every sensor alert made hearts pound. Every shadow seemed to hide a Valthorian warship. On the 5th day, they found something unexpected. "Captain, I'm picking up a small vessel," Bennett reported. "It's damaged and drifting. Life signs aboard." Harris frowned. "Valthorian?" "No, sir. Unknown species." They brought the vessel aboard carefully. Inside, they found a dozen beings with scaled skin and large, sad eyes. They were thin and weak, clearly starving. When they saw the human crew, they fell to the ground and pressed their foreheads to the floor. "Please," one of them said through a translator device. "We will serve. We will obey. Do not hurt us." Harris felt sick. "Stand up. We're not going to hurt you." "Who are you?" The beings looked confused. Slowly, the oldest among them rose. His name was Velith, and he was an elder of a species called the Karath. They had been conquered by the Dominion 800 years ago. Velith had been born a slave, as had his parents and their parents before them. "You are the humans," Velith said. "We have heard of you. The Dominion speaks of your foolishness, your refusal to surrender." "That's right," Harris said. "We don't plan to surrender." Velith stared at him for a long moment. Something strange passed across his face. It took Harris a moment to recognize it. It was hope. "Long ago," Velith said quietly, "my people were warriors. We had cities of glass that touched the sky. We had songs and stories and dreams. Then the Dominion came. They took everything from us. Now we remember nothing. We are shadows." He reached into his robe and pulled out a small stone tablet, covered in ancient writing. "But some of us kept the old knowledge hidden, passed down in secret from parent to child. We remembered, even when it was forbidden." His hands trembled. "The stories say that the Dominion has a weakness. They have grown old and comfortable. They believe no species can resist them, because no species ever has. They are not prepared for enemies who would rather die than submit." Harris took the tablet gently. "Thank you. This could help us." Velith grabbed his arm with surprising strength. "Promise me something human." "What?" "If you survive, if you somehow defeat them, do not forget us. Do not forget all the species in chains across the galaxy. Free them. Let them remember who they were." Harris looked into the old alien's eyes. He saw centuries of suffering there, but also a tiny flame that had never quite gone out. "I promise," he said. They gave the Karath refugees food and medical care, then continued their mission. The intelligence they gathered was valuable. Valthorian ships followed predictable patrol patterns. Their communication networks had gaps. They were so confident in their superiority that their defenses had grown lazy. But the fleet was still massive, still overwhelming. Harris recorded everything and prepared to return to Earth. On the final night of their mission, Bennett came to his quarters. She had been working nonstop on tactical analysis, and her eyes were red with exhaustion. "Captain, I found something," she said. "They're shields. They operate on a rotating frequency pattern. If we can time our attacks precisely, we might be able to disrupt them, create openings in their defenses." Harris studied her data. It was theoretical, untested, but it was the first real hope anyone had found. "Can you make it work?" Bennett's jaw tightened. "I'll make it work, or I'll die trying." The Defiants turned toward home. Behind them, the Dominion fleet continued to gather, confident that the coming battle would be just another routine conquest. They had no idea what was coming. Back on Earth, Dr. Cole sat before a communication array. He had an idea, possibly a foolish one. He began broadcasting on frequencies used by subjugated species across the Dominion. My name is Nathan Cole. I am a human from Earth. We have refused to surrender to the Dominion, and we never will. We would rather die free than live as slaves. He paused. I know many of you have been in chains for so long that you have forgotten freedom, but it exists. It is worth fighting for. Remember who you were. Remember who you can be again. The message spread through the stars. On 100 conquered worlds, beings who had never known hope heard a voice telling them that resistance was possible. Most dismissed it as madness, but some did not. Some began to remember old stories, old dreams. The spark had been lit. Day 15 arrived. Half the time was gone. The Valthorian fleet began moving into position around Earth, forming a perfect sphere of death. High Arbiter Xyrith watched from his command ship, waiting for the humans to finally accept reality. But the humans were not preparing surrender documents. They were building weapons. Xyrith found this confusing. He had conquered 63 species personally over his long career. Every single one had eventually surrendered. Some took longer than others, but all of them reached the same conclusion in the end. Resistance was pointless. Submission was the only logical choice. Yet these humans continued to fight. They were reinforcing their defensive platforms. They were moving civilians into underground shelters. They were training soldiers and pilots by the thousands. It made no sense. They're irrational, Xyrith said to his advisors. They cannot win. Their technology is centuries behind ours. Their fleet is a fraction of our size. Why do they not surrender? His advisors had no answer. They had never seen anything like this either. On Earth, Lieutenant Commander Bennett stood before Fleet Command, presenting her findings. Admiral Torres listened carefully as the young officer explained the weakness she had discovered. The Valthorian shields rotate through frequencies every 3 seconds, Bennett said. If we hit them with electromagnetic pulses timed exactly right, we can disrupt the rotation. The shield will collapse for approximately 2 seconds. That's enough time for our weapons to get through. Why hasn't anyone tried this before? An admiral asked. Bennett's face was grim. Because every species of Dominion conquered lost their scientific infrastructure within a generation. They couldn't develop new technology. They couldn't experiment. They couldn't innovate. The Dominion makes sure of that. Torres nodded slowly. So we have something no other species had. We still have our minds, our ability to create. Yes, ma'am. The Dominion has grown complacent. They won for so long that they've forgotten what a real challenge looks like. Torres stood. Begin production of electromagnetic pulse weapons immediately. Every ship in the fleet gets them. The factories of Earth worked faster than ever before. Scientists who had spent their lives studying peaceful applications of physics now design weapons. Teachers and doctors and artists learned to fire guns. Children were sent to safety bunkers deep underground, hugging their parents goodbye with tears streaming down their faces. Everyone knew the cost would be terrible, but they also knew what would happen if they lost. The empty eyes of the Koroth refugees haunted their dreams. Captain Harris and the Defiants were returned to Earth when disaster struck. A Valthorian patrol found them. 3 enemy ships closing fast, Bennett reported. They've locked weapons. Harris made a quick decision. All power to engines. Get us out of here. The Defiants ran, but the Valthorian ships were faster. Energy beams slashed through space, tearing into the human vessel. Explosions rocked the bridge. Crew members screamed as bulkheads collapsed. Hull breach on deck 4. Crawford shouted, "Engines are failing." Harris gripped his chair as the ship shuddered. They weren't going to escape. He looked at his crew, at the men and women who had followed him into enemy space. They deserved better than this. "Prepare to be boarded," he said quietly. "We'll destroy the intelligence data. They won't learn anything from us." The Valthorians took them prisoner. Harris and his surviving crew were brought aboard an enemy vessel, bound in energy chains that burned their wrists. They were thrown into cells deep in the ship's belly, surrounded by other prisoners from conquered species. Days passed. The humans were brought before a Valthorian commander named Xyrith. a tall female with cold silver eyes. She looked at Harris the way a scientist might look at an interesting insect. "You are the captain of the ship we captured," she said. "You were gathering intelligence on our fleet." Harris said nothing. "Your species is foolish," Zira continued. "You cannot win. Your resistance only delays the inevitable and increases your suffering." She leaned closer. "Tell me about your fleet's defenses. Tell me their positions and strategies. If you cooperate, your death will be quick." Harris looked her directly in the eyes. "No." Zira seemed genuinely surprised. "No? You understand that we will torture you? That we will make you watch your crew die slowly? I understand. Then why refuse? What do you gain?" Harris smiled slightly. It was not a pleasant smile. "Humanity doesn't beg. We don't submit. You can kill me. You can kill all of us. But you'll never break us." Zira stared at him for a long moment. Then she ordered the guards to take him away. The Valthorians broadcast the interrogation across the Dominion as an example of human stupidity. They wanted conquered species to see what happened to those who defied them. They expected it to reinforce their control. They were wrong. On a dozen worlds, beings who had been slaves for generations watched a human in chains refuse to bow. They saw him smile in the face of death. They heard him say that his species would never submit. Something stirred in hearts that had been empty for centuries. On the Koroth homeworld, Velad gathered other elders in secret. "You saw the human," he whispered. "You heard what he said. They are fighting, actually fighting. They will lose," another elder said. "The Dominion always wins." "Perhaps," Velad admitted, "but perhaps not. And if there is even a small chance, should we not try?" He looked at the ancient tablet in his hands. "Our ancestors were warriors. We have forgotten, but the knowledge is still here. If the humans can fight, maybe we can too." Similar conversations happen on other worlds. Small groups began meeting in secret. Old weapons were dug up from hidden places. Languages that had been forbidden were whispered again. Back in the Sol system, Admiral Torres received word that the Defiance had been captured. She bowed her head for a moment, mourning the loss. Then she straightened and continued her work. There was no time for grief. The deadline was approaching. Every human ship capable of fighting gathered near Earth. Massive dreadnoughts floated alongside tiny patrol boats. Civilian freighters with welded-on guns took their places in the formation. It was the largest fleet humanity had ever assembled. It was still hopelessly outnumbered. Torres looked at the display showing both fleets. The Valthorian force was a vast cloud of red dots. The human fleet was a small cluster of blue. The math was simple. Most of these ships would not survive. She opened a channel to the fleet. "This is Admiral Torres. In a few days, we will fight the greatest battle in human history. Many of us will die. I won't lie to you about that." She paused. "But we will not surrender. We will show the galaxy that humanity would rather burn than bow. And maybe, just maybe, we'll light a fire that will never go out." Across thousands of ships, crews listened to her words. They were afraid. They were determined. They were human. The deadline was almost here. Day 29. The deadline had come. High Arbiter Zyrus stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Eternal Dominion. Around him, thousands of Althorian warships waited in perfect formation. He had given the humans 30 days to surrender. They had refused. Now he would destroy them. He almost felt disappointed. The humans had shown spirit, more than most species. But spirit meant nothing against superior firepower. In a few hours, their fleet would be wreckage and their planet would burn. Another primitive species would be added to the Dominion's collection of slaves. "Begin the advance," he ordered. The Valthorian fleet moved forward like a tidal wave of darkness. On the horizon, Admiral Torres watched them come. Her face was calm, but her heart pounded in her chest. This was it. Everything they had worked for, everything they had prepared, would be decided in the next few hours. "All ships, this is Admiral Torres. The enemy is advancing. Remember your training. Remember why we fight." She took a deep breath. for Earth, for humanity, for freedom. The human fleet surged forward to meet them. The two forces collided in a storm of light and fire. Energy beams crisscrossed the void. Missiles streaked through space, leaving trails of white exhaust. Ships exploded in brilliant flashes, their crews dying in seconds. The Valthorians had expected an easy victory. Instead, they found something they had never encountered before. The humans fought like demons. Lieutenant Commander Bennett's electromagnetic pulse weapons worked exactly as she had predicted. Across the battlefield, Valthorian shields flickered and failed. Human weapons found their targets, tearing through armor that had been considered invincible. "Their shields are down," Torres shouted. "All ships, concentrate fire on the lead vessels." A dozen Valthorian warships exploded in rapid succession. For the first time in centuries, the Dominion was taking real losses. On the Eternal Dominion, Xyrath watched in disbelief. How is this possible? How are they penetrating our shields? His officers had no answers. They scrambled to adjust shield frequencies, but the humans adapted just as quickly. It was as if they had studied Valthorian technology for years instead of weeks. "Send in the reserve fleet," Xyrath commanded. "Overwhelm them with numbers." More Valthorian ships poured into the battle. The human fleet began to suffer. Ships were destroyed by the dozens. Thousands of sailors died in the cold darkness of space. But the survivors kept fighting. When human ships were crippled beyond repair, their crews did not surrender. They aimed their vessels at the nearest enemy and accelerated. Kamikaze attacks turned dying ships into weapons. Valthorian captains watched in horror as human crews chose death over defeat. "They're insane," a Valthorian officer muttered. "They're completely insane." In the prison cells of a Valthorian command ship, Captain Harris heard the sounds of battle through the hull. Explosions echoed through the metal walls. The ship shook from impacts. Something had changed. The guards who had been so confident now looked nervous. Harris turned to the other prisoners. His crew, Karath refugees, beings from a dozen other conquered species. They were all watching him. "This is our chance," he said. "The Valthorians are distracted. If we can get free, we can hurt them from the inside." "We are slaves," a Karath said sadly. "We cannot fight." Harris grabbed him by the shoulders. "You were warriors once. Veleth told me. Your ancestors fought and sang and dreamed. That's still inside you. You just forgot." He looked at all of them. "I'm not asking you to win. I'm asking you to try. To stand up one time and say no. To be free for just a moment, even if it's your last." Silence filled the cell. Then an old Karath female stood. Her hands trembled, but her voice was steady. I remember a song. My grandmother taught me when I was small. She said it was from before the Dominion. Tears ran down her scale face. "I will fight." One by one, the other prisoners rose. Humans and Karath and beings from species that had no names anymore. They had nothing but their chains and their bare hands. But they had something else too. They had rage. 800 years of slavery, of humiliation, of forgotten dreams. It all came flooding back. They attacked the guards when the cell door opened for feeding time. The fight was brutal and short. Many prisoners died. But they overwhelmed the guards and took their weapons. Harris led them through the ship, fighting through corridors and passages. They reached the main weapons control room and found it defended by a squad of Valthorian soldiers. The battle cost more lives, but they won. "Can you disable their weapons?" Harris asked Bennett's second in command, a young man named Ortiz who had been captured with them. Ortiz studied the alien controls. "I can try." He worked frantically while Harris and the others held off counterattacks. Alarm screamed. Valthorians pounded on the doors. Then Ortiz grinned savagely. "Got it. Primary weapons array is offline." Outside, the human fleet noticed immediately. The massive command ship's main guns had stopped firing. "The enemy flagship is vulnerable," Torres shouted. All strike forces attack. A wave of human fighters descended on Eternal Dominion. Missiles and energy beams slammed into its weakened hull. Explosions ripped through its structure. On the bridge, Xyrath felt his ship die around him. He could not understand what was happening. This was impossible. Humans were primitive. Conquered species were broken. How was this happening? Across the Dominion's communication networks, word spread of the battle. Conquered species heard that humans were winning. They heard that prisoners had risen up and attacked their captors from within. On 100 worlds, rebellions exploded into violence. Slaves who had never questioned their masters suddenly found weapons in their hands. Old songs were sung in the streets. Ancient battle cries echoed through cities that had known only silence for centuries. The Dominion was not prepared. They had never expected resistance on this scale. Their forces were spread thin, and now they were burning. Back at Sol, the Valthorian fleet began to break. Ships that had expected easy victory were retreating in disorder. The humans chased them, refusing to let them escape. Admiral Torres watched the enemy flee. She was covered in sweat, and her voice was hoarse from shouting orders. Around her, the bridge crew was crying and laughing and hugging each other. "We did it," someone whispered. "We actually did it." Torres slumped in her chair. The cost had been terrible. More than half the human fleet was gone. Millions were dead, but Earth was still free. On the crippled Eternal Dominion, High Arbiter Xyrath crawled through wreckage. His ship was dying. His fleet was retreating. His empire was burning. He found Captain Harris standing in a ruined corridor, still holding an alien weapon. The human was wounded and exhausted, but he was smiling. "Impossible," Xyrath whispered. "This is impossible." Harris looked at him with something like pity. "You forgot something important. You thought fear and pain could break any species. But there's something stronger than fear." "What?" "Hope." The battle was over. Humanity had won. The stars were quiet. Where the greatest battle in human history had raged just hours before, now there was only silence. Wreckage drifted through space, the remains of thousands of ships from both sides. Emergency beacons flashed in the darkness. Rescue vessels moved carefully through the debris field, searching for survivors. Earth was safe, scarred and mourning, but safe. Admiral Torres stood at the window of Fleet Command on Luna, looking at the blue planet she had fought to protect. The cost had been terrible. 2/3 of the human fleet was gone. 6 million sailors had died in a single day. Cities on 3 colonies had been destroyed before the Valthorians retreated. The wounds would take generations to heal. But they had won. A young officer approached her. "Admiral, High Arbiter Xyrath has requested a meeting. He wants to discuss terms." Torres raised an eyebrow. "Terms of surrender?" "He didn't say." She smiled grimly. "Then, let's find out what he wants." The meeting took place on a neutral station between the fleets. Torres and Secretary General Lawson represented humanity. Xyrath came alone without guards or advisors. The arrogant conqueror who had demanded surrender just 30 days ago was gone. In his place was an old alien who looked tired and confused. They sat across from each other at a simple table. For a long moment, no one spoke. Finally, Xyrath asked a question that had been burning in his mind since the battle began. "Why?" Lawson frowned. "Why what? Why did you fight? You knew you could not win. Your fleet was tiny. Your technology was inferior. Every calculation said you would be destroyed." Xyrath shook his head slowly. "We have conquered 400 species. All of them surrendered eventually. All of them chose survival over destruction. Why didn't you?" Torres leaned forward. "Because some things matter more than survival." Xyrath stared at her blankly. "I do not understand." "I know you don't. That's why you lost." Torres's voice was hard, but not cruel. "You spent 50,000 years conquering species by taking away their hope. You made them believe that resistance was pointless. That submission was the only logical choice. And for most of them, it worked." She paused. "But You forgot something. Logic isn't the only thing that drives people. There's also pride, dignity, love, the need to stand up and say no, even when you know you might lose. You can't calculate those things. You can't predict them. Lawson spoke more gently. We would rather die free than live as slaves. That's not rational. It doesn't make sense from a survival standpoint. But it's who we are. It's what makes us human. Zyra sat in silence for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet. My empire is falling. The subjugated species are rising against us on 100 worlds. We cannot fight them all. Everything we built over 50,000 years is crumbling. Good, Torres said simply. Zyrith looked at her with something that might have been respect. You have changed the galaxy. Human, I do not know if it is for better or worse. But nothing will ever be the same. He left without another word. In the weeks that followed, the Valthorian Dominion collapsed like a house of cards. The rebellions that had started during the battle spread to every corner of their territory. Species that had been slaves for centuries remembered how to fight. They remembered how to hope. The Dominion's military, designed to crush resistance, could not handle uprisings on every world at once. They were stretched too thin. Their commanders, who had never faced real opposition, made mistake after mistake. Within a year, the empire that had ruled the galaxy for 50,000 years was gone. Captain Harris returned to Earth as a hero, though he refused to call himself one. He stood before crowds of cheering people and felt only sadness for those who had not made a home. His crew, the prisoners who had died fighting on the eternal Dominion, the millions who had given their lives. The real heroes aren't here, he said in every speech. They're out there in the stars, in the wreckage, in the silence. Remember them. Honor them. Make their sacrifice mean something. Lieutenant Commander Bennett was promoted to captain and given command of a new ship. Her mission was not warfare, but exploration. She would lead humanity's effort to contact the newly freed species and build alliances based on respect rather than fear. Dr. Cole continued his work, but now he had a different purpose. He traveled to liberated worlds, helping former slaves recover their lost histories. He collected fragments of forgotten languages, pieces of destroyed art, echoes of songs that had not been sung for centuries. Slowly, carefully, he helped species remember who they had been. On the Koroth homeworld, Elder Velith walked through streets that had known only despair for 800 years. Now, young Koroth children played in the sunlight. They were learning the old warrior songs, the ones that had been forbidden. They were learning to be proud again. Velith found a quiet hill overlooking the city. He sat there as the sun set, watching the stars appear one by one. Tears rolled down his scale face. A human ship had brought him home. Humans had lit the fire that had burned away the chains. Humans had kept a promise made in a prison cell, a promise to free the enslaved and help them remember. Thank you, he whispered to the stars. Thank you for not giving up. Secretary General Lawson gave one final address before retiring from office. He was old now, worn down by the weight of everything that had happened, but his voice was still strong. To all the species of this galaxy, I offer humanity's hand in friendship. We do not seek to conquer or dominate. We do not want to build a new empire on the ruins of the old. We want to stand together as equals, respecting each other's freedom and dignity. He paused, and his eyes grew hard. But let me be clear. We will defend that freedom with everything we have. If any force threatens the liberty of free peoples, humanity will stand against them. We will fight. We will sacrifice. And we will never surrender. The message was broadcast to every corner of the galaxy. Billions of beings heard it. Species that had never known kindness from the stars. They heard a promise of protection without slavery, of alliance without chains. And they believed. New governments formed on the liberated worlds. Trade routes opened. Scientists from different species shared knowledge freely, accelerating progress that would have taken millennia alone. Cultures that had been suppressed flowered again, creating art and music and literature that celebrated survival and rebirth. At the center of it all stood humanity. not as conquerors, but as examples. They had shown the galaxy what was possible when you refused to surrender. They had lit a fire that would never go out. Captain Harris, now Admiral Harris, commanded the defense force that protected the new alliance. He was older now, with more gray in his hair and more lines on his face. But his eyes were still calm, still determined. Sometimes, late at night, he would stand at the window of his flagship and look at the stars. He would think about the battle, about the friends he had lost, about the moment when everything had hung in the balance. He would think about a small stone tablet given to him by an old alien who had remembered how to hope. "We did it," he would whisper. "We actually did it." The stars that had once seemed so cold now shone with warmth. They were no longer symbols of an empire's dominion, but beacons of freedom, lighting the way for anyone brave enough to reach for them. Humanity had changed the galaxy forever, and the galaxy had changed humanity. They were no longer alone in the universe. They had found something better than conquest, better than survival. They had found family. The story of the great battle will be told for thousands of years, passed down from parent to child, from species to species. It will become legend, then myth, then something almost like religion. But at its heart, it would always be simple. Once upon a time, an empire demanded surrender, and a small, stubborn species said no. That was how freedom returned to the stars.